Today, we're ranking the most consequential generals who served under Adolf Hitler in the Second World War. From the field marshal who hanged at Nuremberg as a war criminal who never disobeyed a single order, to the operational genius whose battle plans are still studied in military academies across the world today. A note before we begin. Ranking Hitler's generals is morally complicated. These men served a regime responsible for the greatest crimes in human history. Many were directly complicit in those crimes. Several were hanged. Others escaped justice. This ranking is based on their military performance in command, not on their moral standing as human beings. Comments will be open at the end. Bring your arguments. D tier. The worst. The generals whose failures defined the German collapse. Rank 8. Wilhelm Keitel. Let's start at the bottom. General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel was the chief of the German Armed Forces High Command, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, from 1938 until the end of the war. He held the highest military post in Germany on paper. In practice, he was Hitler's most senior yes-man. Picture this. You are at a Wehrmacht conference in 1942. Hitler is making strategic decisions based on intuition rather than military reality, ordering operations that experienced field commanders know are impossible. Every officer in the room understands this. Keitel agrees with everything Hitler says. The German general staff openly mocked him behind his back. They called him Le Keitel, a play on his name that translated roughly to lackey. Keitel signed every criminal order Hitler put in front of him, including the Commissar Order, which mandated the execution of captured Soviet political officers, and the Night and Fog Decree, which authorized the disappearance of civilians in occupied Europe. He never refused a single order, not even the orders he knew violated every law of war he had been trained on. Keitel was hanged at Nuremberg on the 16th of October 1946. His final words requested forgiveness from God. The Allied judges were not in a forgiving mood. A man who held the highest military rank in Europe and used it to do absolutely nothing of military value. Rank 7. Friedrich Paulus. The first German field marshal in history to surrender in the field. Friedrich Paulus commanded the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad from August 1942 until the surrender on the 2nd of February 1943. The catastrophe at Stalingrad consumed over 90,000 German soldiers as prisoners and killed hundreds of thousands more in the months of fighting. Paulus had the chance to break out in November 1942, when Soviet encirclement was still incomplete. Hitler forbade it. Paulus obeyed. By December, the trap had closed. By January, his men were freezing and starving in the ruins of the city. Hours before the final surrender, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal, an unsubtle hint that no German field marshal had ever surrendered alive and that suicide was expected. Paulus surrendered instead, walking out of his basement headquarters into Soviet captivity. He spent the rest of the war as a prisoner, eventually appearing on Soviet radio to denounce Hitler. He died in East Germany in 1957. Paulus was not a stupid man, and the disaster at Stalingrad was not entirely his fault. But the decisive breakout he refused to attempt is the moment that defined his career, and it defines his place at the bottom of this list. C tier. The flawed. Generals whose reputations exceed their actual results. Rank 6. Walter Model. Hitler's fireman. Walter Model earned a reputation in 1943 and 1944 for stabilizing broken sectors of the Eastern Front, taking over command of collapsing army groups, and restoring defensive lines through sheer force of will. He was personally brave, walking through frontline positions under fire, slapping subordinates he thought were panicking, and demanding the impossible from exhausted units. His defensive work at Rzhev, at Kursk after the failed offensive, and on the Vistula in 1944, was genuinely impressive at the operational level. So why is Model in C tier? Because his late war commands ended in total collapse. Given command of Army Group B in the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, he could not turn Hitler's hopeless offensive into anything other than the destruction of Germany's last reserves. Encircled in the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945, with over 300,000 men, Model refused to surrender and ordered his troops to disperse instead, abandoning his army to capture or death. He shot himself in a forest near Duisburg on the 21st of April 1945. A brilliant defensive tactician whose career ended in operational suicide and personal suicide on the same scale. Rank 5. Gerd von Rundstedt, the senior-most German field marshal of the war. Gerd von Rundstedt commanded Army Group A during the invasion of France in 1940, which executed the sickle cut that destroyed the French army. He commanded Army Group South during Operation Barbarossa. He was the senior German commander in the West for most of the war, responsible for the Atlantic Wall and the defense of France from 1942 until D-Day. Rundstedt was the embodiment of the old Prussian officer class: aristocratic, distant, professionally competent, and politically passive. He despised Hitler in private and obeyed him in public. He was sacked 3 times during the war for arguing with Hitler and reinstated each time because Hitler needed his prestige. On D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, Rundstedt requested permission to release the Panzer reserves at dawn. Hitler was asleep. By the time he woke and approved the release, the Allied beachhead was secure. Rundstedt was sacked again in July 1944. He sits at number 5 because his record contains genuine victories, but the decisive moments of his career are remembered for passivity, not action, a symbol of a Prussian military tradition that no longer had the will to resist the regime it served. B tier. The capable. Workhorses of the German military. Rank 4. Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare. Heinz Guderian wrote the book on Blitzkrieg, literally. His 1937 volume, Achtung Panzer, outlined the doctrine of concentrated mechanized attack that the Wehrmacht used to overrun Poland, France, and the Western Soviet Union. He commanded the 19th Panzer Corps during the invasion of France in 1940, leading the spearhead that crossed the Meuse at Sedan and raced to the English Channel. He commanded Panzer Group II during Operation Barbarossa, driving deep into Soviet territory before being halted by Hitler's order to turn south rather than continuing to Moscow. Guderian argued with Hitler constantly. He was sacked in December 1941 after refusing to obey a stand-fast order. He was recalled as Inspector General of Panzer Troops in 1943 and as Chief of the Army General Staff in July 1944. By then it was too late to save Germany, and Guderian spent his final months in command, attempting to manage a catastrophe he had once helped create. He survived the war, served 3 years in American captivity, and wrote a memoir in which he blamed almost everything on Hitler, a theoretical genius whose career was repeatedly interrupted by his refusal to stop arguing with the man who held his career in his hands. Rank 3. Albert Kesselring, Smiling Albert. Albert Kesselring was a Luftwaffe officer who became one of the most effective ground commanders of the war, an unusual transition that almost no other German general managed. He commanded the German air fleet that supported the invasion of France. He commanded the Mediterranean theater from 1942. From September 1943 until the end of the war in Italy in May 1945, he commanded German forces conducting one of the longest, most successful defensive campaigns in modern military history. For 20 months, Kesselring held the Allied armies in Italy at line after line, the Gustav Line, the Caesar Line, the Gothic Line, inflicting enormous casualties on British and American forces and tying down resources Eisenhower needed elsewhere. He was sentenced to death after the war for the Ardeatine Caves massacre, the execution of 335 Italian civilians in retaliation for a partisan attack in 1944. His sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, then to release in 1952 on health grounds. Kesselring is in B tier rather than higher, because his record is morally damaged by war crimes, and because his theater, while important, was not the decisive front of the war. But as a defensive commander, very few in history have ever matched him. A tier, the Great. Rank 2, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. The most famous German general of the war, and one of the most admired by his enemies. Erwin Rommel commanded the 7th Panzer Division in France in 1940, where his rapid advance earned the unit the nickname Ghost Division because nobody, including German headquarters, could keep track of where it was. He commanded the Afrika Korps from February 1941 to March 1943, conducting one of the most brilliant tactical campaigns of the war against numerically superior British forces. He commanded Army Group B in Normandy, attempting to defeat the Allied invasion at the waterline because he understood, correctly, that Germany could not win a battle of attrition in the Bocage country. He was wounded by Allied aircraft fire on the 17th of July 1944. 3 months later, implicated in the July 20 plot against Hitler, he was given the choice of public trial or private suicide. He chose suicide to protect his family. Rommel sits at number 2 because he was a magnificent tactical commander, but never operated at the strategic level that would make him a candidate for number 1. He treated Allied prisoners with such consistent decency that Winston Churchill praised him in Parliament. He understood, eventually, that the regime he served was monstrous, and his quiet resistance came too late to matter. A great soldier in a terrible cause, S-tier, legendary. The operational mind that almost won the war. Rank 1. Erich von Manstein. And now we arrive at the top. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, universally regarded by Western and Soviet military historians as the finest operational mind on either side of the war. Manstein was the architect of the Sickle-Cut Plan that destroyed the French army in 1940, the unexpected armored thrust through the Ardennes that bypassed the Maginot Line and reached the English Channel in 10 days. He commanded the 11th Army during the conquest of Crimea in 1942, including the long siege and capture of Sevastopol. After the Stalingrad disaster, he was given command of Army Group South in early 1943, and from February to March of that year, he conducted the Third Battle of Kharkov, one of the most studied counteroffensives in modern military history. With a fraction of the Soviet forces opposing him, Manstein stabilized the entire southern-eastern front, retook Kharkov, destroyed the Soviet Popov Group, and inflicted over 50,000 Soviet casualties in 6 weeks. Soviet historians later admitted that the Kharkov counteroffensive was the moment they realized the German army was still capable of operational miracles even after Stalingrad. Manstein argued with Hitler constantly. He demanded operational freedom Hitler would not give him. He was sacked in March 1944. He spent the rest of the war in retirement, then served 4 years in British captivity for war crimes related to actions in the Soviet Union. He died in 1973, having written a memoir titled Lost Victories that has been required reading in military academies for 60 years. Manstein earns the top tier because he was, by the consensus of professional military historians, the best operational commander of the Second World War on either side. He served the wrong cause. He committed acts that earned him a war crimes conviction. But as a pure military mind, in the cold language of generalship, nobody on Hitler's side, and very few on the Allied side, ever matched him. That is the ranking. From Wilhelm Keitel, the field marshal who hanged at Nuremberg for never refusing an order, to Erich von Manstein, the operational genius whose battle plans are still studied in military academies 80 years after he last commanded a division. If you enjoyed this video, the one on screen now is for you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments which of Hitler's generals you would have ranked differently. We read every single one.